brought as a slave to Greece. And on the other hand, on the other side, we see a couple also linked to the war of Troy. It's Helen and Paris. So they are actually maybe the cause of the war because they run away. It's almost like Juliet and Romeo. She's a Greek woman, the most beautiful woman of Greece, and he's a Trojan prince, and their love goes beyond the borders, and this then causes her husband to call on the other Greeks and go to Troy and destroy the city after 10 years.
Do you have any idea about the ownership of the villa in which you're standing?
But we don't have a name so far, but I think it must have been one of the local, big man politicians' affairs. We know that in Pompeii every year they voted, so they were always campaigning, and they used private homes, dining rooms to make political campaigning. They invited many guests. I think 20-30 people could find place here easily. And they would use the atmosphere of the dining parties and talking about the Greek images and myth and stories and somehow adapt them to their experience, private but also political and social.
Gabriel Zutrigal, thank you so much and congratulations on your discovery. You can see more of that, see the room itself, in Pompeii, the new dig, which will begin on Monday 15th of April at 9 o'clock on BBC Two and of course on iPlayer.
11 minutes to 8 now, and time for Thought for the Day. The speaker this morning, joining us in the studio, is Senior Rabbi of Masorti Judaism, Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg. Good morning to you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Good morning. We've entered the Hebrew month of Nisan, when a special blessing is said over blossoming fruit trees to God, who created this world so that it lacks nothing for our benefit and joy. How different from the desolation I've seen in Ukraine and witnessed in Israeli and Palestinian villages. The human cost of war is appalling, but nature also pays a terrible price for our violence, and I fear and grieve for it too. My gorgeous land, wrote a Ukrainian friend after Russia destroyed the Kharkovka Dam. The fruits, the tomatoes we grew, gone for a generation. I visit an improvised market in a Kiev suburb. People are buying basics surrounded by bombed out homes. One stall sells all kinds of vegetable seeds signifying hope. But an area of Ukraine big as Britain is laid with landmines, meaning sudden death, not growth. Yet we need this earth, its fields, forests, and all its life for the future of everything. An Israeli friend leads me around his kibbutz, Re'im, near Gaza. The name means neighbors, as in love your neighbor. He relives October 7, Hamas's cruel attack. Nearby they took hostages, some 130 even now held captive. Here is a burnt-out home. There his friends were slaughtered. This is the children's garden, empty, gone to weed. A great tree killed in the marauding fire stands a blackened emblem of that terrifying day. I've seen pictures, but cannot imagine the appalling desolation to which so many thousands of Gazans caught hapless between Hamas and Israel are returning grief-stricken in Kfar Yunis. Another friend takes me to the West Bank Palestinian village of Zanuta, abandoned from fear of settler threats. Wild irises flower, blue in the rough grass. Gone are the people who loved this place. I worry for the safety and future of Israel and the whole region. I pray that none of these beautiful lands will be destroyed, for the earth must be our healing. It transcends our transience. Trees breathe life. Each spring hope uncurls with their unfurling leaves. I've planted for the dead. My garden has a tree for the Gazan doctor's 3 daughters killed in the previous war. We've stood by it in testament, together. But I long to plant for the living. It must not be beyond imagining that on a day not just of sorrow but also of determination and joy, when, God willing, the hostages are freed and this terrible war is ended, with Israeli and Palestinian companions, we'll plant trees and fields together.
That was Thought for the Day with Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg. Time now 8 minutes to 8.
Might there be light at the end of the tunnel for Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, who, following its publication of a huge trove of US military files in 2010 and 2011, is being pursued by the United States authorities for espionage. Today marks the 5th anniversary of Mr. Assange's imprisonment in Britain. The US is trying to extradite him, but Joe Biden yesterday suggested that America's long pursuit of Mr. Assange may be called off. Stella Assange is Julian Assange's wife. Good morning.
Good morning, Johnny.
Do you take heart from President Biden's comments?
Well, I think it's a good sign. The Prime Minister of Australia overnight said that he is optimistic, so it looks like things could be moving in the right direction. And obviously, after not just 5 years in Belmarsh High Security Prison, but 14 years since he effectively lost his freedom right after publishing this trove, then lots of people around the world, the Pope, press freedom groups have been saying for years that this case should be dropped, that it is a danger to press freedom.
The comment and the suggestion that the hunt for your husband may be called off comes at an interesting time, doesn't it? Because the UK courts, who are pondering the extradition request, are waiting for an assurance from the US authorities that the death penalty wouldn't be used before they rule on the extradition request itself.
Yes, that's right. The High Court gave Julian a kind of conditional leave to appeal and asked the US for so-called assurances in relation to the death penalty and also in relation to the First Amendment protections, because they identified that he is being charged for publishing these documents which evidenced war crimes, and that the United States itself in its arguments has said that he may not be able to use the constitutional protections on press freedom because he's an Australian citizen and not an American. So this is two issues that the court has identified as obstacles to his extradition, but it doesn't take away the fact that he is being charged for publishing truthful information that revealed state criminality.
I mean, the critics of your husband attack the way that he published the material. They say it jeopardized lives, and that negates his claim to be a journalist and therefore to have free speech protection. I mean, his supporters, of course, say this is about, as you do, about revealing wrongs.
Yeah, and we categorically deny any claim that he did not publish responsibly. He published and took every measure of care. There has been a lot of talking points from the Pentagon claiming otherwise, but under oath the United States has had to admit that they have seen no evidence of any person coming to physical harm as a result of these publications. What we do know is that these publications revealed this physical destruction and death of tens of thousands of innocent people, and that is really what's at the basis of this. It was embarrassing, and it gave evidence of state cover-ups, of death squads, of torture, and Julian embarrassed the United States. The United States wants to extradite him and has kept him in prison because of it. But I must say, this is a prosecution that is from the Trump era. It's a Trump legacy, and really Joe Biden should have dropped it from day one. His predecessor, Obama, which Biden was part of that Obama administration, decided not to pursue this prosecution. They said there was a New York Times problem, as they called it, that it would set a precedent that could be used against the rest of the press because it criminalizes journalistic activity, news gathering, and that's why Obama didn't pursue it and commuted Chelsea Manning's sentence. Chelsea Manning was the source, the leaker, and Julian is the publisher.
May I ask how Julian is?
Well, he's extremely unwell. He's stressed, obviously, because he could be extradited to the United States to face 175 years in prison. This is also the country which, under the Trump administration, there are very credible reports that he was this victim of a murder plot that the CIA was hatching. So the country that has plotted to assassinate him is still able to extradite him, and I think I hope Joe Biden really just drops this case now, as the entire human rights community and press freedom community is asking him to do.
We'll leave it there. Stella Assange, thanks very much.
2 minutes to 8, time for the weather. Here's Elizabeth Rizzini.
No, thank you. Well, things will be turning warmer for most of us as we go through the next day or so. Lots of dry weather, some sunshine, a nice ridge of high pressure, but it's still going to be cloudier out towards western coasts in particular, and there will be some hill fog around as well. It's a very mild start to the day this morning. Some mist, some fog across the southwest at the moment, across southern England and South Wales, and we'll keep the low cloud here, I'm afraid, for much of the rest of the day, although it could brighten up at times. It's a cloudy start, but there will be some more sunshine emerging across northern England and into the Midlands and East Anglia as well. The small chance of 1 or 2 showers developing across northwest England. Northern Ireland is dry for much of the day, some rain arriving later on through the afternoon and into the evening, but a mixture of cloud and sunny spells before then. And for Scotland, then it's quite a cloudy start, again very mild out there for most. Patchy drizzle and some general mist and murk, some sunny spells emerging particularly out towards the east, and it should stay dry. It's quite breezy today, a brisk southwesterly wind blowing, highs of 15 to 19 degrees Celsius, but I think some spots will see 20 degrees. It's most likely for parts of Norfolk, the East Midlands, perhaps Lincolnshire as well. And then tonight we're going to see some rain just lifting northwards across Northern Ireland into central and southern Scotland. Very mild tonight, lows of 9 to 12 degrees.
Coming up in the next hour, the latest on the threats coming from Iran, the health secretary on whether the Tories will ever meet that promise to cut waiting lists, and much more from Harold Wilson's close advisor Bernard Donahue on the extraordinary news of the secret affair the former Prime Minister had that has been kept secret now for half a century.
You are listening to Today on Radio 4 with Nick Robinson and Johnny Diamond. It's 8 o'clock on Thursday, the 11th of April. The headlines this morning: the United States has promised ironclad support for Israel as fears rise of an imminent Iranian attack. Detectives have charged a man with the murder of a woman who was stabbed in Bradford whilst out with her baby. A daily pill to treat chronic migraines is to be made available on the NHS in England, and Pompeii yields more of its buried treasures, a banqueting room painted black and decorated with frescoes. The BBC News is read by Alan Smith.
President Biden has promised Israel ironclad support from the United States as fears grow that Iran may be about to retaliate for an attack that killed senior Iranian commanders. The strike in Syria at the start of the month destroyed an Iranian consulate building. Yesterday, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, vowed to punish what he called the evil Israeli regime. Israel has refused to be drawn on whether it carried out the attack. Our correspondent in Washington, Will Vernon, reports.
President Biden warned that the Iranians were threatening to launch a significant attack on Israel, which US officials fear could happen any day. Concern has been growing in Washington over the increasingly aggressive rhetoric used by officials in Tehran, who have vowed to retaliate for the alleged Israeli airstrike against an Iranian consulate building in Damascus. Mr. Biden said that American support for Israel was ironclad, and the US would do all it can to protect the security of its ally. US officials are keen to send a very public message to the Iranians that despite differences of opinion between Mr. Biden and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over the conduct of the war in Gaza, any attack on Israel will be met with a forceful response by Washington.
Reports in the United States say an American general is due to visit Israel today to discuss Washington's fears about an attack by Iran. Our international editor Jeremy Bowen, who's in Jerusalem, told us the situation was unpredictable.
Iran tends to move in quite unexpected ways, and the suggestion that they might, almost by appointment, launch a missile strike directly on Israel in the teeth of these warnings from America, when the Iranians have made it very clear they do not want an all-out war in the Middle East. I think that's unlikely. I think they will respond because they've said so often that they must, but it might not be the way that people are expecting it, nor indeed when.
West Yorkshire Police have charged a man with the murder of Kulsuma Akhtar, who was stabbed in Bradford while pushing her baby in a pram. Habiba Massoum, who's 25 and from Burnley, will appear before magistrates later today. Louisa Pilbeam reports.
Kulsuma Akhtar, who was 27, was attacked in Bradford city centre on Saturday afternoon. She was taken to hospital where she later died. Her baby was unharmed. Habiba Massoum was arrested on Tuesday, 170 miles away in Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire. Last night he was charged with murder and with the possession of a bladed article. 4 men who were arrested on suspicion of helping an offender remain in custody.
37 organisations that support homeless people have written to the Home Secretary James Cleverly, urging him to reconsider plans that could see rough sleepers in England and Wales moved on, fined or arrested. The Home Office has described current legislation as outdated. Our political correspondent Peter Saul reports.
Charities including Crisis, Amnesty UK and The Big Issue are warning that plans to tackle what's described as nuisance, rough sleeping and begging risk stigmatising people who are forced to spend the night on the streets. Dozens of Conservative MPs share those concerns and are threatening to vote in favour of amendments to the Criminal Justice Bill when it returns to the Commons. The Home Office says the legislation replacing the 200-year-old Vagrancy Act focuses on antisocial behaviour and won't criminalise anyone for simply having nowhere to live. Ministers have been holding talks with backbenchers to try to keep them on side, and the potential rebels are confident of securing concessions when Parliament returns from its Easter break. The government is likely, for example, to tweak the wording of the bill to allay concerns people could be moved on because they smell.
A verdict is expected in Vietnam in one of the world's biggest cases of bank fraud. Prosecutors say a wealthy property developer in Ho Chi Minh City, Truong My Lan, swindled the Saigon Commercial Bank out of more than $40 billion. She's denied the charges but faces a possible death sentence if convicted. Here's our Southeast Asia correspondent Jonathan Head.
Everything about this case is huge. Not just the staggering sums of money allegedly siphoned out of one of Vietnam's largest banks by 67-year-old Truong My Lan, but also the number of defendants, 86, the 2,700 people summoned by the court, and the 6 tons of documents submitted as evidence. The trial has been covered in minute detail by the Vietnamese media. The authorities are making it a showcase of their anti-corruption campaign, which has now run for 8 years under the leadership of the veteran Communist Party chief Win Phu Trong. He believes public anger over corruption in one of the world's fastest growing economies poses an existential threat to the party's monopoly on power.
An education think tank is warning that schools in England could lose more than £1 billion in government funding by the end of the decade because falling birth rates are leading to fewer pupils. The Education Policy Institute, which aims to raise classroom standards, says some schools could be forced to close or merge with neighbours to remain financially viable. Simon Jones reports.
The Education Policy Institute says as pupil numbers fall, schools will become more strapped for cash. It predicts that by 2030, even if schools receive a real terms increase in funding per pupil of 0.5% each year, the budget for primary and secondary state schools will fall by £1 billion compared with current levels due to demographic changes. The Institute warns that smaller class sizes do not bring about proportional decreases in staff costs and energy bills, meaning some institutions will struggle to stay viable. The National Association of Head Teachers said any cuts would be a catastrophe for children. The Department for Education described the think tank's figures as speculative, adding that school funding was being increased next year to more than £60 billion, which it described as the highest level ever in real terms per pupil.
A new treatment for migraines could soon be available on the NHS in England. The National Institute for Health and Care Excellence has recommended atogepant for those who have unsuccessfully tried other drugs to try to prevent migraines. The tablet will at first only be prescribed by specialist doctors in hospitals. The drug's already available in Scotland. Rob Music from the Migraine Trust told this programme the new pill shouldn't be thought of as just a strong painkiller that everyone with migraines can have.
You can't just be given it straight away, so you would have had to have failed 3 other preventive treatments first before you were eligible for this one. I know there are conversations about should treatments like this be almost first line rather than end line, because historically, before this and similar treatments that are available, the treatments that were for other conditions such as epilepsy, for depression, people often beta blockers, quite nasty side effects.
Archaeologists excavating in the Roman city of Pompeii have uncovered stunning artworks in a villa. The walls of its large banqueting room are decorated with frescoes of figures from Greek mythology, while the floors are covered in mosaics. Pompeii, near Naples, was buried after the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. Our science correspondent Jonathan Amos sent this report from the excavations.
It's a painstaking process to remove the tons of pumice and ash that smothered this town almost 2,000 years ago. This is the biggest dig in a generation, and each day it's turning up surprises. The latest is an imposing black and white reception hall where Pompeii's elite would likely have gathered to entertain and eat. Its walls display exquisite frescoes based on events that triggered the Trojan War. Helen, the world's most beautiful woman, is seen meeting her suitor Paris for the first time. Pompeii is the best window we have on the people and culture of the Roman Empire. The problem for archaeologists is not finding its treasures, but working out how to conserve them for future generations also to enjoy.
The director of the Pompeii Archaeological Park, Gabriel Dugtriegel, told us he didn't know who the villa belonged to, but the banqueting room would have served a political as well as social purpose.
It must have been one of the local big man politicians. We know that in Pompeii every year they voted, so they were always campaigning, and they used private homes, dining rooms to make political campaigning. They invited many guests. I think 20-30 people could find place here easily.
And the BAFTA Games Awards are being held in London tonight. The ceremony honours outstanding creative achievement in video games. Gaming sales in the UK hit £4.7 billion last year, though the industry is still seen as lagging behind television and film when it comes to wider cultural appreciation.
Alan, thank you. It's coming up to 8:10. NHS waiting lists will fall and people will get the care they need more quickly. That was the promise Rishi Sunak made when he became Prime Minister. Ever since, those waiting lists have stubbornly refused to fall. Waiting lists which, remember, had doubled under the Conservatives even before the pandemic hit and before strikes disrupted the health service. Well, later this morning, the NHS in England publishes the latest waiting list data, and we'll also get some other figures which will be interesting on how long people have been waiting to be seen in A&E. There's some hope, as we heard in the last hour of this programme, that that figure may come down a little as there's been a big drive to incentivise hospitals to deal with those who arrive seeking emergency care and to look after them more quickly. Let's get the latest from Victoria Atkins, the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, who joins us on the line from Westminster. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Now, we're in that awkward situation where you've seen the figures and we haven't, and you can't tell them us. But let me ask you something you can tell us. Will Rishi Sunak have met his promise to cut waiting lists since when he became Prime Minister, when these figures come out?
Well, again, I'm in difficulties, as you say, but what I can refer to is the fact that in the last 4 months we have seen waiting lists fall, and that is, as you rightly say, despite the fact we've had some really quite, damaging industrial action by junior doctors, and all of the impact that that has, not just in terms of people's treatment on the day in hospital, but also, of course, the preparations running up to industrial action, people not being booked in or their appointments being cancelled, and then the aftermath of industrial action where those clinicians, those nurses and other professionals who have gone into work, picked up the slack during the strikes, they then of course need time to rest and recover from that.
So waiting lists have been falling for 4 months. Let's guess that they're probably likely to fall this month, but we can guess something else, can't we? With absolute certainty, waiting lists will still be higher than when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. He will have failed to deliver his pledge.
Well, I don't think anyone could have thought that when the Prime Minister made that promise that it was an easy promise to make and it was going to be really easy to achieve. It is precisely because he wanted to tackle this issue that, you know, many people, many listeners will be affected by. He wanted to tackle that, and we're trying to...
Not easy, of course, but let's be clear, he made the promise, he's failed to deliver the promise.
Yes, and in the context of the NHS as a whole, we know that, for example, in January, 57% of patients went from referral to treatment within the 18-week target time frame. So I guess what I'm trying to say with this is we know, of course we know there are people who have had or having, you know, they're waiting, they're in pain, they're in anguish. We absolutely understand that.
Now, I know you've
Across
not
the
been
NHS
Secretary of
as a
State
whole-
for 14 years, but the Conservatives have been governing for 14 years, and throughout most of that time there was no pandemic and no strikes. Indeed, waiting lists in the NHS doubled before COVID struck. 2.3 million in 2010, 4.6 million in 2020. So wouldn't it be fair to say that overall the Conservatives have failed on the NHS?
No, I don't think that is correct. And the reason being, if you take a step back, you know, the NHS looks after 1.3 million